Like vampires and ghouls? Superheroes and androids? Want to learn how to write them? The Speculative Fiction Academy is perfect for you. With 5 curriculum tracks and 3 ways to learn, you'll go beyond the fundamentals to hone your craft. Visit speculativefictionacademy.com to learn more.
I'm Rosemary Claire Smith, and I write hard science fiction. I also write fantasy, horror. I have an interactive novel called T-Rex Time Machine. And a bunch of my fiction and my nonfiction pieces have found their way into analog science fiction. In fact, the most recent one that I published is in this issue. It's the August issue. The story is called The Next Frontier, and it is alternate history, but there's a lot of hard science fiction in it because it deals with an alternate history of the Apollo space program.
My name is Bruno Soares. I'm a Portuguese author. I write mostly sci-fi and fantasy. I've been writing for 30 years. I've been writing for TV, movies, theater, but mostly books. About a few years ago, I started approaching the international market because the Portuguese market is so small. I launched the first trilogy, which is the Dark Sea War Chronicle, more space opera than hard sci-fi, about something like the Battle of the Atlantic of World War II, but in space, in another solar system, in another galaxy.
I'm Sean Hillman, a speculative fiction writer that's still out in the Obscura mythology from a few years ago. I have another story coming out early next year in another anthology, and my novella epilogue should be out probably around either the end of this year or beginning of next year. I write a lot of different kinds of fiction, but in particular science fiction, and I'm working on several hard science fiction stories. I also do game design, tabletop role-playing games, and I've done reviews and articles and content creation for EN World, which is a tabletop role-playing game site. So I'm a lot heavily into writing and fiction, and in particular, I do love reading hard science fiction.
My name is Kotouc, and I'm a Czech writer of science fiction and alternate history. And I think my story is similar to Bruno's. I've published lots of books over here in the Czech Republic, I think 18, and I do space operas, military science fiction, and alternate history with like alternate Czech and Slovak kingdom fighting on the high seas. And a few years ago, I've decided to try and go to the English market, where I'm in the process of publishing my tetralogy called The Central Imperium, which the first book is The Frontiers of the Imperium, which has been translated by Isabel Stainsby. While I not write like technique-focused science fiction, like it's not about the tech directly, I try not to screw around with technology, and especially with military science fiction, I need to like describe what these spaceships can do, what they cannot do, and how can it work. And I've written short stories in all kinds of genres, and some that are specifically hard science fiction.
This is one of those genres that is very polarizing because, you either really love it or you really don't understand it, right? And it's kind of this interesting thing. I have a feeling I know the answer to this question, and it probably started very young for all of you, but I'm wondering what got you into higher science fiction, and because of its nature, of its degree of difficulty, do you think like that with this genre in specifically that you really have to love it to do it or to enjoy it?
I would say it's challenging as opposed to hard for a lot of people. I mean, I know there are a lot of writers who look at it or they'll look at analog and they'll say, oh, I could never write for them. And I always want to say, don't limit yourself. If you like science, I mean, to begin with, if when you're just, scrolling through your phone or something and there's a bunch of news articles and you find yourself gravitating to one that's about something new in astronomy or physics, or in my case, dinosaurs, if you're really, or chemistry, you're really curious about the natural world and you like science museums, and I think it's a genre for you, both as for reading it and for writing it. I think sometimes people think, oh, you have to have an advanced degree in whatever it is, physics or neurochemistry or something. And no, I don't think so at all. I think there are some ways that you can get into it, and if you enjoy reading it, it's not like every story, every book in the field is going to be for you. Well, that's true with any kind of fiction.
Actually, for me, it's somewhat the other way around. I'm not a great sci-fi reader. I never was. I have tons of comic books and European sci-fi and all kinds of things. But what I really like to read is spy novels and war novels and historic novels. The thing is, I didn't want to write in the history which was already made, which was already written. I wanted to write in a completely different place. I wanted to write about big battles and all kinds of strange and fantastic events. That's why I went into sci-fi. I Since then I've been reading more and more and watching more and more, and there's a lot I like in sci-fi. I think sci-fi and fantasy is the kind of genre that appeals to our generation, to Xers and beyond.
For me, I science fiction is like, it's more from like, I can let my fantasy go more ahead instead of, for example, when I'm writing alternate history. And but I agree with Rosemary that people think, oh, you need to have advanced degrees and all kinds. And actually, no, I haven't studied anything even remotely science related. And I have lots of advisors. By the same token, I'm writing military science fiction and military history, and I've never served in the military, so I have lots of military advisors on these things. But what is really appealing at science fiction to me, not just hard science fiction, but generally, is that I can make something up and just enjoy it. It's more about not necessarily why, but why not. And as someone pointed out, if I write about a battle in my alternate history and there is a bridge they are going across, I need to find out what bridge is that and what river is that and how is the bridge called and how is the river called. In sci-fi, I can simply made it up. And as for science stuff, I remember in one of my novels, in Emperor in Exile, I had like a moon restaurant, and they served a whiskey made on the moon, like under a dome. I was thinking, can you do that? Can you grow barley on the moon? And the answer from my advisors would be, yes, you can under a dome. It would be super expensive, and there's no economical reason for you to do that, but you can do it. And I said, yes, it's upmarket whiskey from the moon. Go for it. For me, it's more that I want to tell a story that is fun to read and people would enjoy it, and I enjoy writing it, but I try not to screw over with physics that much, and I try to be plausible. Of course, none of us knows how faster than light travel can work, but we do something like that, like as they do in Star Trek or something?
I think for me, I came into hard science fiction through cinema, specifically Kubrick's 2001, where other people were like, "Oh, the movie's boring," and I was like, "Are you kidding? It's boring? No, I think this is fascinating." And when I started reading science fiction in my teens and realized there was an associated book, I started looking into science fiction much more deeply and realized that it was a very broad range of stories that are told, from what is called space opera to hard science fiction to military. There's a lot of idioms, a lot of subgenres that we talked about. I think, though, what has always fascinated me about hard science fiction from a writing perspective, and to a certain degree from a gaming perspective, but I'll address that in a second, it lets me think logically about a story, and whereas with a story that's a little bit more loose or has less rigor about the rules, that takes on a lot of emotional content. But when I'm writing something that's hard science fiction, it allows me to focus on different aspects of the human experience. And to a certain degree, and I run the science fiction track at CHRONICLES, and we have a lot of very smart scientists who graced the track over the years. But whenever I introduce folks, I'm like, and I have a political science degree, and it's a real science because I had to take a stats class. But it does, hard science fiction also lets me delve into some of the quote-unquote softer sciences as well, showcase them well, I don't know if politics is ever in a positive light, but showcase them in a more, a larger light. And just to touch on gaming just for a second, there's not as much science fiction role-playing as there is, for instance, fantasy. And the hard science fiction is a much more, a much smaller subset of that as well. But there were a few games that were very early on role-playing when the industry was very young, that Traveler, for instance, that have a degree of hard science fiction to them. That's another way I became interested in the genre and idioms.
To build up on what Sean is saying, I think that until the 18th century, maybe a little bit before that, in the 17th century, people didn't realize that science had anything to do with life. It was just something that wasn't practical, it wasn't pragmatic, it didn't have a real impact in anything in life. And after the Industrial Revolution, it started having an impact. And that's when science fiction began as well, when technology began creating or generating anxiety all over the globe, starting with simple things like machines are going to take my jobs, and to things like machines are going to dominate the world. And this anxiety, which is something that I think propels the fiction, it's also more, I wouldn't say resolved, but it's also brought to the table. It's also digested by sci-fi actors who are just putting possibilities on the table and putting it forward. From Jules Verne with the submarines to I don't know, to Ted Chiang and the conscious Philip K. Dick with the problems of conscience. And this is not just a thing of the hard science. If you pick up things like Philip K. Dick, Man in the High Castle, you'll find that the whole idea of consciousness, or the whole idea of intelligence, the whole idea of what is reality really, has become a source of anxiety. And that means that even the soft science begin to have a lot of interest when you talk about sci-fi.
There's a famous conversation that Stanley Kubrick had, speaking of 2001, where he talks about the studio claimed that the movie was super boring and he needed to cut it down. He goes, well, or it's not that the movie's boring, maybe it's you that's the boring person. So maybe if you're bored, you're boring, is basically what he said. And then he never cut it down, so
Yeah.
If I could maybe build on something that Bruno was saying about human advances and human anxiety, yeah, it really goes hand in hand. And starting with the robot is going to take my job to the robot is going to kill all of us. But on the flip side of it, man, oh man, the robots are giving us a pretty nice life, and all the technology these days, it's doing stuff for us that we never really dreamed of. So, but for us as writers, part of the job is only partly, well, what's the scientific advance going to produce? What kind of technology is going to result from it? And then how is that really going to mess us up big time? Or how are we going to take it and mess with it and make things worse? Because that's
or the other way around, because I write a little bit like as Jan was saying, in the same kind of idea. When I write a story about what if the Battle of the Atlantic happened in space in another galaxy, I'm not writing about our technology. I'm not writing about anything that really. I'm not focusing on technology. I'm actually doing the process the other way around, which is, what if I focus only what it is to be human, what it is to go through war, through something of the most extreme experiences that you can imagine, and if you put and all the things that are around don't exist, it doesn't matter, because what you actually looking at is characters going through stuff, and you can see the essence of what's being human, which as Sean was saying, and many others said it before me and before Sean. What really is interesting to talk about, maybe the only thing interesting to talk about, is the human drama, is the human experience.
Yeah, I agree. I think I don't remember who said it, but there are only two questions in every story: who am I, and what's the truth? And all the science or historical stuff or whatever, they are just like background, and at the end it needs to be about the characters.
This genre seems to be, more than any other, a massive research project. I mean, there seems to be a lot of research you have to do, and I'm kind of curious how much time you spend on the research versus the writing.
I'm an outliner, and I write these things. And in science fiction, when I need to do some science thingy to advance the plot, I figure out, okay, this is what the heroes have, or they need to do something, and this is the end point they need to go to, or this is what needs to happen. And I brainstorm it then with some of my advisors. And sometimes I need to figure it out as the first thing. And I once written a short story which has recently been published, not published, but translated into English. And I'm now looking for places to publish it. And it's called Excellent Annihilatio. And it's about a mission to the moon with all female crew on the spaceship, like 6 female astronauts, because there is some alien probe on the moon that's like sending some signals that cause sterility, and it's killing people that come near it. And there's something that I need women to be naturally like more resistant against. And so I asked my scientist friend, and I asked her, listen, this is the problem. I need this probe to emit something, to be doing some radiation that will be doing something that females are naturally more resistant. Then for the next 2 weeks, she's been sending me emails what a douchebag I am, and that's some nonsense. And I ask about bullshit and whatever. And then she said, okay, maybe this would work. And she figured out that it can damage like neurological network, because women have naturally more neurons in their bodies. I didn't know that. And so it's still damaging them, but they can resist that for a longer time.
I'd say for me, for hard science fiction, it's about 50-50. I will come up with an idea, and I'll write the idea with the thought that, okay, there are certain spots in here that I've got to go back and research. I'm not trying to get a PhD in whatever science I need, but at the same time, I will usually actually go to different sources. I might pick a scientist that is in pop culture. But then I'll go look for someone who I've never heard of, trying to get what their perspective on it might be. And yes, I will go to Wikipedia, but that's just a start. It's like, okay, this is what the very, 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 very layman knows about this. So from there, I will dig further and further and further and try to, do the very best that I can. But I also try to keep myself, and I think others mentioned this, I'll try to keep myself out of the deep end. I've never written an equation, I won't say never, but almost never written an equation into a story in that regard. But when it comes to something like I'm familiar with, politics, for instance, political science, those sorts of things, I feel more comfortable, obviously, doing that. But I will still go and I will read a little bit of a particular philosopher or someone who had a lot of thought on it and refresh myself with their points of view, so I can be very accurate. And that, I guess in my mind, I try to be, when I'm writing sci-fi, I try to be as accurate as possible, because I feel like that's sort of part and parcel with what we're doing.
Actually, a hard question for me to answer. I mean, I sort of admire Sean for saying, about 50-50. I think it depends on what the area of science is. When I was doing a story about the Apollo era of the space race, I thought I knew a ton of stuff about it, but man, oh man, I spent an awful lot longer researching things and finding out things that I really had never known about it. Living in the United States, I knew a lot about the United States Apollo and before that Gemini and Mercury missions. I did not know nearly as much about what the Soviet Union was doing, for example. But when I'm writing something else, like when I'm writing dinosaurs, I do a whole lot less research because I already know a lot about dinosaurs. Though having said that, it can be deceptive because if you studied something a while ago, you think you know about it, and man, the science just keeps marching on. And what you were taking as this is just the way it is, maybe the thinking in the last 5-10 years is no, it's not that way at all. It's actually something different. Or having somebody who is an expert in it say, oh, this is how it could happen. Because a lot of people in scientific fields, they're very curious, and you set them out a little problem. How can we get to this point? And they start thinking about it. And I love the whole, at first it's like, well, no, that can't happen. But then, well, they think about it for a while, and then they say, here's how this might work. Find a good expert. And people love talking about their area of expertise.
Very seldom do I write hard sci-fi that I really need to research. And even when I do, I tend to guide the story towards things that I really know about, like psychology, sociology, organizations, whatever. I use what I usually call narrow world building. And what is narrow world building? I only world build when I need to. I have my story, I have my characters, and as Jan was saying, okay, I only need to think what the characters are eating in space in another galaxy the moment the characters go to dinner. Otherwise, I never think about it. Even if it's a completely different world, as this world that I was talking about, the Dark Sea War Chronicles, I wanted to make the Navy credible in some way. So I read a lot of naval novels like Patrick O'Brien or C.S. Forrester or Alexander Kent and Douglas Riemann, which I love. And I looked on Napoleonic era ships and meshed them up with the World War II tactics and ideas, and so research actually comes into it as well.
I was actually surprised to find the rules are kind of mucky, right? There's not a lot of them. As I was really surprised by that. I thought there was going to be a ton of rules. You have the 3 golden rules I found, which are, know your thesis, do your research, and the other rule is to not be afraid of the unknown or what you're going to discover. Other than that, it was just repeating, tropes. Basically, was most of the rules that I found. So I'm kind of curious from all of you, which of those do you gravitate towards most? Is it kind of the unknown factor? I would imagine that's kind of appealing in writing something like this. Am I wrong about that?
The sci-fi has a tendency, maybe as other genres and other areas of literature, has a tendency of organizing itself around a few themes. Even though there's a lot of subgenres, from a post-apocalyptic to space opera to hard sci-fi to military sci-fi, whatever. There's, I don't know, 20, 30 subgenres or something like that. Two themes I can recognize, which I like and which I think I still have a lot to give. One is what I call narratives of conscience, and Philip K. Dick uses it a lot, and basically you can see it in The Man in the High Castle, but you can also see it in The Matrix, in Neuromancer, and Inception, which are those types of narratives which you actually question your view of reality. You're always questioning: is this reality, or is this, or am I imagining or dreaming or something like that? And then you have something interesting that you can find in Ted Chiang, Villeneuve's Arrival, and what I call narratives of perspective, which is suddenly you and 2001 by Kubrick has exactly the same premise, which is maybe there are different perspectives that we can't even imagine, but that are out there.
I think it's also about what kind of technology was there in the 19th century, and the big thing was that in the 19th century all the new technological discoveries was easy enough for most people to understand. Like if you say steam engine, they have said, okay, there is the hot water that produces steam, it moves the machines. People understood that. How many of you really knows how your cell phone works? Generally, science fiction has always been a mirror to the time we see now. If you pick any science fiction book and you don't know the author, you don't know when the year it was published, if you read it, you probably can guess at least the decade when it was written. Right? And it's the same with TV show, because it's always a mirror of the current society. And sometimes the modern technology can take a giant leap, and it leaves the current science, the just a few years older science fiction, obsolete. Like very few authors writing science fiction in like 90s from near future predicted the internet or the social media or the impact those things had on society.
It is mirroring our current times. Even if you take something like post-apocalyptic fiction, which has been around for a while. At one point, it was all, this is a vision of the future after a global nuclear war, and there's radiation sickness and massive people dying. And nowadays, if you're looking at post-apocalyptic fiction, it's more, maybe not more likely, but it's equally likely that the apocalypse is going to be a climate apocalypse.
It's a pandemic of some
Or
sort.
a pandemic. Yeah.
Or a pandemic as well. So we are always writing about what we're worried about and what scares us.
For me, when I'm writing something that's hard or harder science fiction, I really, and this is kind of a fine line, I think. I don't want to lose a sense of wonder, right? I think that you can have flights of imagination, right? It's not just hard, cold numbers. But at the same time, I try to avoid, some sort of magical force in the universe that the protagonists or the antagonists or everyone can tap into. Stick to what is possible.